Hey, I'm ready. Hello.
Okay. First off, let me get back in the habit of the push to talk.
Mm-hmm. All
So I
right,
gotta get back in that habit.
I'm ready.
All right, we're starting it there. Hello and welcome back to the Star Wars podcast. I'm your host Day with my co-host Ian.
It's a
And
me.
last time, I should say, we don't really do weekly. Last time we watched The Bad Batch and we reviewed it, told us our thoughts and some of the theories we have moving forward, or even some things that they were kind of going on behind the scenes. And so, we had this idea for a while ago, and we're just like, you know what, let's do it. So we actually sat down and we rewatched the original Star Wars 1977, Star Wars A New Hope. I guess at the time it wasn't called New Hope.
Mm-hmm.
And we just kind of, took some notes and took some talking points of while watching it. And we want to talk about it just like how it is as a movie as a whole, kind of by itself, how it kind of fits into the saga, and I don't know any of our thoughts on it. And boy, howdy, did I write some things.
Yeah, so to start off, this has obviously been a piece of media that's been around for a long time, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions about it, and it's hard to remove one's opinions from the context that Star Wars has had as like a piece of media people are invested in, but also as a piece of media that has influenced like other forms of media. Um, and a lot of the observations that I had about the movie, I was trying to take from the perspective of somebody who's never seen them. Um, and it's interesting. It's interesting when you try to watch the first movie, pretending like you've never seen any of the other Star Wars movies, uh, because there's a lot of stuff about the first one that makes it a great movie. Don't get me wrong, it really is. Uh, but there's some stuff too where like, I can't help but wonder if we've maybe, I don't know, uh, looked at our past with rose-colored glasses.
So I
Um,
know I know exactly what you're talking about. And so in my approach to this wasn't trying to watch it like I've never seen it before. It was kind of going in with the knowledge of the universe of how it fits into the Luke saga, the original trilogy, to the Skywalker saga, which is technically, I guess, all nine movies, if you want to believe some people who don't know what they're talking about, and just like the franchise as a whole. But it was not really interesting because I actually watched it with Ash, and Ash had never really sat down and watched it before. At least it's not since she was a kid, and so she
yeah,
was sitting there and watching it basically for the first time with like minimal knowledge, and was kind of asking me questions, and it was really interesting to see how we both viewed it differently. Just because I'm such a fanatic and I really like it, and I went into it knowing a lot, and she just kind of was just didn't really. But it made for an interesting watch, and I think she like unknowingly kind of signed up to do the next couple because she's like, oh, I really want to watch the one with Jar Jar Binks. I know everyone hates it, and I'm like, well, we're gonna do 4, 5, and 6, and then go to one. She goes, oh, did I just sign myself up for the next three movies? I'm like, you don't have
that's how
to.
that's how you get them. That's how you get them, though. You're like, oh, you watch that one, but now you've got to watch the others.
But yeah, so I guess yeah. First off, like I want to start, and it's really funny because I don't think a lot of people know. Because I watched this when I was in college, and this was again after years of watching, Star Wars. The original trailer for this movie. I want to ask, have you seen it?
I have. Oh my God.
Yeah,
It's
recently.
not okay. Not recently. But like, I know what you did.
When I
Please
when I
tell me
was
about this
when
trailer.
when I sat down and I'm like writing up all my notes for this digitally, and I'm getting OBS set up. I watched it. It's like 2 minutes long, and very clearly they did not know anything about the movie when they put it together because like it had like it's like I guess for the 70s it's dated and you're like okay it works. It technically kind of matches some things about the movie, but like like it's just the narrator had no idea. Like the scriptwriter or the narrator, whoever it was, no fucking clue.
Oh, for sure.
Because they say terms like the story of a boy, a girl, and a universe. So like my first thought is I'm sitting there like, what the hell? What the fuck? Because there are three men, a Wookiee, two droids, and a princess. which one's the boy? Like, I guess due to the like the cutting, like the editing, they tried to make it out to be like Luke and Leia.
Hmm.
But as we know, as we know,
As we
it's
know.
not. That's not how it works. Not how it happens.
No, it's not. And I mean, it's interesting because to me, it kind of punctuates the like story of George Lucas trying to get his movie made, you know, because he's like very famously was like rejected a bunch of different times and had to go through all sorts of hoops in order to just like get people's attention, you know, to be like, no,
Mm-hmm.
guys, seriously, I'm passionate, and like, it's just I can't help but feel for the man, you know, like if you look at the trailer and you think about who George Lucas is, and you think about the time and how much trouble he had just getting a word in edgewise on his own creative project. Like,
Well, like,
seeing the trailer is like like nobody had faith in this movie doing well, and it's so wild to me.
and this is a little peek behind the curtain. Is why I love this freaking fact. It's like evidenced by when he goes with the I guess 20th Century Fox and signs over the rights. He's like, I want the rights to the toys, and they're like, sure, have them. Biggest fucking mistake of their career.
Oh yeah. Oh
But
yeah.
anywho, so like again, just like things of like big, like it's a big sprawling space saga, and like I'm looking it up, and I looked up, I think it was Wikipedia, which I love, because I looked up the Han Shot first discussion, which we'll talk about later. And
Mhm.
the first line is like, oh, it came from the movie Star Wars: The Space Opera.
Yeah.
What?
Well, it was supposed
What?
to be. But yeah, right. Like at the end of the day, I would not call Star Wars operatic the same way that I would call like an actual opera operatic.
I,
You know.
I don't. Okay, I guess I don't know the definition of an opera or what constitutes it, but typically there's, I thought, singing, and the closest thing to singing we get is the Mos Eisley Cantina. Like, I know. Anyhow, whatever. So like we're talking about like how it's like dated and it's old and no one wants it, but like something of note as well is that it was the 70s, so like the standard of movie wasn't what it is today, where they've had 40, almost 50, nope, 50, almost 60 numbers. I don't know, it's fucking decades old at this point, and they didn't have that time and that technology to like really build up movies, and so like it is dated, it's a little old. uh I don't think, I think if Star Wars never existed and George Lucas tried to make the first one, today, or even like in the last like 10 years, I don't think it would have like held up as much.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean I
think
kind
it
of
would have taken off.
I agree. And not because of like the substance of the movie being poor, but I agree because I feel like a lot of more modern moviegoers have kind of fallen into a format in their movies, the way that they're presented. I believe I've talked about this before. Um, that Star Wars, the first, excuse me, Star Wars, the first movie, like the official first movie, New Hope, would just have been boring for it because again, one of the things that I found myself very interested in was and one of the things that I always like talk about when I say that how much I really like the original movies, um, is how much the movie tells its story without having to spoon food you. Oh, excuse me,
Oh my.
spoon feed you the story, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's like it's atmospheric. They take moments to sit down and they have you listen to John Williams, God, the Lord himself of music, John Williams. You know, like other movies,
Like,
they don't pause for the same kind of time. They don't. It's just
so
it's a different style. I don't think people would mesh with it very well.
I absolutely agree with everything you just said, because like John Williams, they hit like the soundtrack perfectly, like from the get-go. They didn't take
Hmm.
any time of like, oh, it took a movie or two for them to catch up. It like from the get-go they've got all the right like motifs, they've got all the right soundtracks and all the right just like orchestrate masterpieces, pretty much, like they hit that, you know dead on.
I mean, I could not have imagined, but just taking a moment, taking a moment to appreciate John Williams. I'm sure he's
A
heard
moment of
it.
silence.
Yeah, a moment of silence for John. I'm sure everybody's heard. I'm sure everybody's heard at this point. Like, or sorry, not everybody. I'm sure that he has heard from everybody at this point how great he is for his orchestral talents. But I'll tell you what, man, ugh, killing it.
And I mean, absolutely, but not being a music player myself, I enjoy it, but I have no idea what it takes to, c- compose that type of music. I just know that he's a very talented guy. But no, but going off one of your points a little bit ago, you're talking about how they don't really, spoon feed you the story, and you also have to take into consideration the context of when it was made. It was made in '77, or I guess it was released in '77. And if you look at the other movies that exist in that time, like specifically sci-fi, like I'm looking at, you're looking at like Star Trek, you're looking at Dune, Alien, Blade Runner, all of these are just kind of really just throw the audience in without too much explanation. They're like, it's sci-fi. I'm not going to explain how a car flies. Just do it. Just do that. Like they really push that like suspension of belief,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess sci-fi kind of has to do to begin with. But like, at least in current standards, we're used to it, or at least they can do it in a way that's like they explain just enough where you're like, okay, I guess that makes sense. Versus like, there's spaceships, there's lightsabers, there's blasters, tractor beam. It's they just throw out these words. They don't really say or do anything with
Right.
it.
Right.
Um, so like I think that's one of the contributing factors of like why if you, it is dated, it's a little old, and why it wouldn't hold up. Obviously, if they rewrote everything to make it to today's standards, like maybe it'd be better. But like it was almost formulaic, or at least it was very reminiscent of the time of the '70s and '80s. Uh, but of course, you look at Empire Strikes Back, where they don't have to do that. It doesn't have the same faults because it already is like a little more established. But they also do better at explaining things than I feel like they did in A New Hope.
I mean, but you're right. Like it. Another reason why it might not hold up super well is because of the way that uh, like it set a tone. Like you said, we are accustomed to seeing sci-fi things and being like, yeah, that's science fiction stuff. That looks normal. That looks fine. That's acceptable, right? We're not startled by the idea of somebody trying to put to mass market the I the pitch of a moon-sized battle station. Where back then that was like a spectacle, that's like this humongous deal. It's this tremendous thing where everybody's like, "Whoa, what? It's a thing." And there was a lot of mumbo jumbo, and this is actually kind of one of the things that I also wanted to bring up. I felt like, even though John Williams did a great job, there were a lot of things about the soundboard of the movie that, as somebody pretending that I had not seen the movie, listening to the sound effects of the movie, it it struck me as interesting that at the beginning when I was listening to it, I was like, yeah, I know these are all the sounds. These are all the sounds that you just hear from sci-fi, but they're really like not representative in any way of like what actual technology sounds like. Like we don't have booping and whistling, beeping and bopping anythings, This is all just stuff to, in some way, communicate that there's some sort of advanced technological process going on. Um, and they even like centered an entire character around this idea, right? Like R2D2 when he shows up,
That is true. Yeah, I never really
you
thought
know,
about
he
that.
he shows up and is just he's making all these noises, and it's supposed to be cute and funny, but it's also supposed to like help set the
Art.
tone to tell you like, hey, this is what the future of like the distant future is, like minus the prologue where it's like in a a long time ago. The the whole thing, like the whole setting is so wildly alien from even what we have today, even if there are some similarities in like some of the tech and whatever. It it's really weird. It's really weird to look at it all and to try to like abstract it because it wouldn't nobody would get it. If it hadn't if it didn't already exist, nobody would get it. They'd come into the movie and they'd hear all these weird noises, they'd see all these weird lasers and everything exploding and all the weird camera framing and all the lighting and stuff that was like kind of touched up here and there, but it wasn't, bad. It just also wasn't entirely accurate. It was very theatrical, right? Like I'll tell you, man, it was just weird. So the entire rest of the movie changed for me. Listening to the sound of like lightsabers, listening to blasters, listening to the aliens making weird noises. The bantha when in the very beginning of the movie. Spoilers if you haven't seen it. When
All
they
right, you and your spoilers.
when when Luke's out on the desert, he's out looking for R2, and he gets attacked by the sand people. And you hear the banthas. It's like wow, makes like a weird like vacuum cleaner noise or whatever. It's like the sound design is brilliant, but in a modern audience, if Star Wars had not existed, how many other things would like we wouldn't get it. We'd look at it and be like, this is weird. We don't. I don't know. I'm talking in circles. I just like I got really fixated on this point
Well,
specifically while watching the movie and like
yeah. So I guess I never really thought about it that way because, like, again, sound isn't like the biggest thing for me. Like, I enjoy good sound, I enjoy good music, but I never really pay attention to. And I notice it when it's like super, like really noticeably bad. But
yeah.
just like in that really large gap of like moderately bad to average to like a little better than average, like I don't really like notice it. Um, but like the two points I want to mention is like the sci-fi that doesn't really the sci-fi sounds that you wouldn't like hear today or hear in today's movies. I think the lightsaber, like the hum, like the ignition and the hum, is not something that you would hear if someone had to create a new sound for this.
Hmm.
You wouldn't hear it. But also, like I think that's probably the closest that you're gonna get to sci-fi because you think sci-fi, you think machineries. There's a lot of humming. There's not the beeps, the boops, the whoops, whatever. There's just a lot of humming because it's like engines, it's machinery, it's like constantly going, but it's also the fans that are cooling it down. It's just a very constant, steady sound,
Right.
and the lightsaber actually hits that. Like whether or not they intended it to do that, they wanted it to be iconic, and of course it is. But like it really actually hits that when you think about it.
That's true.
And
That's
so,
true. Yeah.
yeah, and so like so that's like kind of a fun observation that I kind of heard or thought of when I was listening to you. But also, you mentioned R2D2, and I hadn't really thought about the old school version of sci-fi, where there is a lot of like bubbling and beeps and whatever that doesn't exist today, and how R2D2 is like I don't know, not reminiscent, but like the pinnacle of that.
Hmm.
But also, I really like that I think it's funny because there's no transition. Like we know nowadays that like people can understand R2D2. Like it's technically a language, and we know that there's C3PO whose entire job is to translate, and so it makes sense that he speaks droid. But there's a harsh transition, like right on like when Luke and like Leia are on Yavin, or the
Hmm.
Yavin 4, whatever it's like technically called, on the rebel base.
Yeah.
Suddenly Luke is just chatting with R2D2. In the entire movie, he looks to C3PO. It's like, what do he say? But then like there's just a very steady trend. Like there's not like a steady like, oh, he's picking
Oh,
up some things. It's just
I-
like bam, he can
right.
speak to R2D2.
I didn't even notice that. You are so
Yeah,
right. Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
And like being a first movie, it's like you can kind of point that out, but I like how at least they kept with it. So like Anakin Skywalker, just kind of from the beginning, can just talk to R2D2. Like he's a little kid in the Naboo fighter, and he's just chatting with R2D2. He's like, "What do you mean? Turn this on." It's like I love that. It's become a thing, but it's really apparent when because it's such a widely known thing for the rest of the franchise that when it's
Right.
absent, you notice it.
Yeah. No, okay, okay. So that's I had an adjacent observation, not to just continue down this like very odd spiral of like
For the
weird,
next
quirky
hour,
things
we're
we
talking
noticed.
about sounds, nothing
Right.
else.
Well, so in sci-fi, a thing that's very common in writing for sci-fi is that the author will have a really cool idea and have to explain context to the idea because nobody else has thought of their idea and it's not common knowledge. And so, there's exposition and there's it's not just in sci-fi, but like you'll see a book periodically that'll be like, this is what a grav channel is. And somebody will be like, I'm the insert character for the reader because I don't know it as a character inside the book, the same way that the reader doesn't. And I'm gonna ask, but Captain, what's a grav channel? It was interesting
That's okay.
because there. So the reason I bring this up is that like, the movie does this. The movie obviously does this to an extent. Um, it has to like explain to people like what it's got going on, stuff that they don't understand already. Um, it spends the first like 20 minutes, 20 or 25 or so minutes, almost 30 minutes of the movie focusing on characters who do in part some amount of exposition and predominantly just atmospheric storytelling, not even about the main character of the movie and or the main characters of the movie and then the following movies. It literally spends like the first several, like, imagine reading a book like that where you don't even meet the protagonist until 10 chapters in. And one of these things that I really
That is
dislike,
true.
right? Like one of these things that I really dislike about modern, like the Marvel style movies, where they just sort of exposit and exposit and exposit, and then rapid jump cut between all the scenes at you is, there's no world building, there's no like time to sit and appreciate and like absorb what's going on. It's just running through the plot. And it's one of the criticisms that I believe I've shared about the more recent Star Wars movies because, they're of that same era, that same style of direction. This this movie, right? Like in the very beginning is just C3PO being our only lifeline to understanding the world without just taking in the pictures of the environment, and all the conflict going on. C3PO isn't like just there talking to Luke. C3PO is like talking to us for the first like 20 minutes of the movie whenever he talks to R2D2 until Luke goes out to find R2D2. And then after that, the entire movie shifts its perspective onto Luke, and it just does it. And C3PO is there to continue to help Luke out, but like it was just this really cool thing that they did. I felt like with the storytelling, um, which is why that like your comment about C3PO explaining everything to us when talking to R2 was relevant because like he doesn't just explain to us what like R2 is saying. He's like talking about everything. He's like, of course, I speak however many different languages. Oh, sir, what about that droid over there? R2, it's so great to see you. It's like it's setting us a tone that like the world is super technological. There's a lot of like emotion and drama. Everybody's kind of on edge a little bit, or like have a very extreme emotion. Even the robots have some form of sentience, but it's also lighthearted and cute, and it's trying to be lighthearted. It's not trying to take itself too seriously. Just everything about it. Like C3PO's our lifeline for this, so like the first 20 minutes of the movie, just talking to us about how we don't know anything, giving us all the context, and like those little bits with like R2D2 are, I think, some of the most educational bits, because when they find Luke and Luke's about to stumble on the hologram as he's talking to as C3PO is talking to Luke and he's talking to R2D2. R2D2 is like blah blah blah, we did whatever, booping and whizzing. And C3PO like has a snarky retort, and then Luke's like, oh, you guys were part of the rebellion? And it's like, well, I didn't hear anybody really say that, but I mean, I guess if we're already here, and then C3PO just goes right on in and just kind of spearheads the whole
Well,
exposition thing again.
so
It's just
yeah. So okay, so two things. One, I guess three things. One, R2D2 is a prick. Like before you really know him, in the other ones he's like cutesy, kind of snarky, like oh that's R2D2, he's a droid with an attitude. In this one, it's just like oh what's that hologram? What hologram? And C3 was like what do you mean what hologram? Like the one you're
right.
playing right now. Uh,
Yeah.
and then same thing where they remove like the restraining bolt and the hologram disappears. He goes play that again, and C3 was like what the hologram you were just playing. Like, what do you mean, what hologram? It's like this stupid droid, like which obviously he's playing dumb, but like thinking about it, like like the complexity of a droid's mental state to be able to play dumb is really fascinating. But B, he's a prick. He's
Hmm.
just a little prick, and at least he's a cute prick later on when you know who, like, you know his character. But first getting into it, okay. Uh, Second,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
talk
yeah.
about you talk about the exposition and how C-3PO. Need I remind you, the main exposition that Star Wars does for its movies, the big literal novel of a block text scrolling through space, they do plenty of exposition by themselves. Okay?
It does, right? Like, so it sets the tone, right? It's the
It's just
epilogue,
4 paragraphs
or
explaining
not
how we got
epilogue,
here.
prologue, right? And like that, and that makes right. Yes, absolutely. Uh, I guess that's like 25 minutes then, because that really does
Yeah,
sit there for like a
it's
hot minute.
I had like I read it to Ash because she's like I can't read like how it was like fading off into the distance and like how it was scrolling. She's like I can't read this, so I was reading out to her, and I'm like wow they really just throw a lot right at you,
Hmm.
just right there. And then my third point, as I end my monologue, is I think it's very interesting that you made that observation, which I then in turn make another observation off of, is
Hmm.
that the hero's journey. And I don't know if you do you recognize the term.
Hmm. Hmm.
So for those who don't, the hero's journey is the kind of narrative beats that a character goes through in a very traditional book or movie or any type of media uh, that I guess is kind of more in kind with like fantasy, where it's the narrative beats are like this, displaced from the main hustle bustle, like kind of like almost this backwater character who learns that they have a special power or a special purpose, and they are dragged into this really weird, bizarre, new mystic world. They've got this mentor who teaches them, and they've got like the big bad villain, but they have to like lose to the villain at one point. There has to be like a low point where you think they're gonna end, but they have this resurgence. They come together with their friends and they overcome the adverse, and like it's for very formulaic. Like if you don't know the term or heard it before, like you know it, you recognize it. It's in almost every movie, especially with Disney movies, really, Marvel and Star Wars specifically. And but the best part about all of this is that that Star Wars, that Luke Skywalker is like the prime example of what the hero's journey is, because it took that concept, whether George Lucas meant for it or not, but it took that concept and it really just blew it up to popularity, and so it's really interesting that he is the main character. That maybe not in the first one he's the main character because there's again like 4 or 5 main characters, but that he's the exemplary like hero's journey, you know, as we later learn, chosen one, but not really. And he's not even in the movie for the first like 20 minutes. I think it's just a really funny
Yeah, right,
thing to think about.
right. Isn't it weird? Isn't it weird? Like, I don't know. I
I
mean,
don't.
when I thought about it, I thought about the storytelling. I was like, oh, Luke's not even here right now.
Yeah, it takes a while to get there. Like, but anyhow, whatever. Moving on, because this is something that I wanted to talk about a little bit because
Right.
I've never really fully understood it.
Huh.
Is that this is kind of going into episode 3 at the very end. You see Darth Vader reconstructed. All his limbs are mechanical now. He's put in the helmet and the cowl and everything, the cape, and he asks the Emperor like, "Where is Padme?" And he goes like, "You killed, like she's dead. You killed her." And he just lets out this big bellowing like James Earl Jones like no, like
Hmm.
into just the void, and he's like in just his raw emotion, crushing all of the technology around him with the Force. And I'm pretty sure if Palpatine wasn't Force sensitive, he'd be dead too. But he probably protected himself somehow. And so, and everyone makes fun of that, and they're like, "Oh, that's not, like not my, that's not the Vader. That's not the Vader I knew." And I had to look it up at one point. I'm like, why does everyone hate on this? And
Hmm.
and most of the answers that I saw like online, because it's not like it's just a personal preference thing. So there's a lot of like Q&A websites, whatever, and the person goes, well, because that's Vader is this like emotion, like this is supposed to be like this cool, seething, menacingly calm anger, that you feel the anger, like the anger and the tension is palpable, but like he doesn't like show it. He doesn't, you know, really, really like let it burst out. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of see that. But when you watch episode 4, he's sitting there yelling and barking orders and crushing people's throats constantly.
Right.
He's not calm and collected. He's angry and he makes it known. And so then I just go back and I'm like, well, why where are you getting this concept? Like maybe in 5 and 6, sure, but like this is the original source material. Where are you? What? He was this at one point. So why are you upset that he got back to it at another point in his life? I don't know. It just never made sense to me.
Take that, Darth Vader haters. What are you gonna do about that one?
Well, it's really the prequel haters.
That's yeah, but you know,
Well, the
those guys,
snobs.
those angry people. Take, you know who you are. Ha ha. Got served. I mean, I'm not what yours is, right? Like, um, I think a mythos about the most interesting components of Darth Vader definitely got built. Uh, this man is definitely, in some ways, he's collected. Here in, this is the only movie we're referencing at the time, A New Hope. He's collected. He has a composure to him. He's very ominous. But you're right. Like this dude, this guy kind of goes off the chain a little bit every now and then. Maybe he's not like full on losing his mind, taking out temper tantrum Kylo Ren style, or sorry, taking out his temper tantrum on
Hmm.
control panel Kylo Ren style. But this guy still was like, I'm so much more powerful than all of you weird imperial bureaucrats in the middle of a very important meeting. I'm just gonna choke one of you out for dissing me. Like
Yeah.
that's
Like
that's not a very well put together man.
no, but I think that's a little more in line what people are wanting or expecting of him is that like he doesn't just like grab them and throw them against the wall, you know? Like he's that Sith where he's that anger them that like almost lack of control where he wants to kill or at least teach him a lesson, but like that's the calm and collected where he like very just slowly starts crushing in and goes, I find your lack of faith disturbing. You know, that's not the Kylo Ren that and we've technically I kind of seen when he was like boarding the cruiser when he apprehended Leia. You know, he's literally holding Rebel up, just not even with the Force, by himself. So this is a very strong man, and just throws
Yeah,
him against the wall and
yeah.
seemingly killing the Rebel. Like, you know, he has a very different demeanor to it. But I don't know. I think that side of him is a little more interesting. But I guess that's what people are referencing when they're talking about Vader being like that.
I mean that's also fair, right? Because like if you wanted to look at um, Vader and like compare him to other characters that might or might not be more or less composed, silent, brooding, um, I don't think anybody's really wrong for feeling that like the episode three's depiction of Vader, Anakin officially becoming Vader, was like a little off. But I also don't think that like I share the opinion of it being weird because episode three's Vader is Anakin Skywalker becoming Vader in like the height of an incredibly traumatic series of events. Darth Vader is like the thing that's left over, like
Mm-hmm.
Darth Vader is
Like, I mean, he is all that raw emotion that like he's had 20 like between 3 and 4, he's had 20 years to kind of compose himself and to grow with the dark side, whereas he'd only really had it maybe a few days, I guess, like weeks at most, where you know he hasn't really controlled the dark side and his emotions and learned how to focus as strongly as he later does. And so, like, I think an emotional outburst isn't out of line.
not at all, and especially one where uh, he's barking at people and giving them orders in the middle of a an invasion of a ship, and is just being a cool, calculative badass, right? Then when everybody's like, "Oh, well, the only thing that was really weird here was that an escape pod was jettisoned, but that was probably nothing." And he's like, "I doubt it was nothing. Get out back on your shit. It's probably over there. Everybody, get the fuck out of here. Or he just, by comparison, that's not like a super big, like, angry outburst, is what I'm trying to say. Like, I guess I can see that,
Mm-hmm.
uh, where people are coming from when they're like, I want this because I expected it. Like, there's a little precedent there. I also feel like he's still a little bit more unhinged than people give him credit for. I wouldn't call him, I'd call him menacing, not like collected or like, brooding. I'd call him menacing.
I
Maybe that's just me
think
mincing words.
I think he is later on. When he's at the end of five, and for the most part throughout six, he is that like brooding, menacing. You know, when Lando Calrissian betrays Han and Leia, and he's like in the table, or at the end of the table. You know, he's not super what you know. He's like, I'd love if you could join for dinner or something, like supper or something like that. You know, like, and
You're
he's
right.
like, and when he's even when he's fighting and talking to Luke, and when he's apprehends Luke and taking in six and taking him to the Emperor and fighting him, then like that's when he's like calm and collected, and so I can see that. But he didn't start that way. Is I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Right, for sure. And so, not to like belabor the point, we've been talking for a minute. Um, I'm you have a thing. You have a thing that you've written down. I'm just referencing your note that
Are
you
we
wanted
talking
to
about the
talk
next
about.
point?
Yeah, the next
Point
point, and
four,
I want to give you a chance to
dude.
be able to get
Dude,
into
I'm
that.
so excited. Like, we've been going on for about Vader for a while, and clearly we're gonna talk on it a little more because I just I don't know where to begin with this one because I love it so much.
Hmm.
Like, I guess also talking about Vader because he's not just in these movies; he's also in Rogue One, and that scene when the rebels are like facing down this dark hallway, you can't really see, and then you just start like you just hear the the microphone between the scuba tank. You know, you just
Hmm.
hear him breathe in, breathe out. You hear Darth Vader's breathing, and they're like, "We don't know where he is. Like, what's gonna happen? Like, open fire when you see him." And then just the red ignition at the end of the hallway, and it just like barely showing him, and he's just sitting there like, "I'm about to fuck your day up." You know, that's such just a good scene. And then like how like badass and how strong, and he is just tearing these rebels to shreds. That is like I think that's the Vader we need, but not the Vader we deserve. I want to see more of that. And you know exactly how we can get more of that Vader? Remake the original trilogy. You can do it. James Earl Jones is still alive. Fucking capitalize Disney. And like because like we've seen it. We have seen it in multiple iterations where they can CGI these characters to be like their original age or younger, you know, like because you see in I guess it's technically nine. I don't know if we see it in seven or eight, where we see Luke and Leia as their age in episode six. You know, they're 40 years younger than they actually are now. And you see it in The Mandalorian when this is a spoiler, Ian. At the end of season two of The Mandalorian, when Luke Skywalker appears and he takes off his hood, and it's him from episode six. You know, they have the ability to do that. It's going to cost a lot. Hold on. They had Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One. They had that technology 5, 6, 7 years ago, whenever they made Rogue One, and they just keep showing us that like honestly, if they're not in the plans of making it now, I don't know what's wrong.
So I
Like,
I'm
just
gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna play the adversary in this topic. Um, yes, they have the technology. Disney's deep fake is like no joke. Um, there's a few sensitive points to talk about around trying to do a remake. I think that if there is something that they can do, leveraging their theatrical technology, in order to do like a cool special edition version of the old movies, where like rather than it just being all the weird 3D inserted aliens all over the place, and Like if they could find if they like touched it up a little, they gave it the good
Oh,
old video game
absolutely, absolutely.
3D remaster treatment, then like that'd be okay. I I'm just gonna be that guy. Carrie Fisher is probably one of the greatest people of all time, and I would feel weird if they were to try to use her likeness with another deepfake. Uh, Personally, because like it was already a weird thing for me when it showed up the first time, right? So just glossing over that point, like the first time that they tried to do it in the more recent movies, and after Carrie Fisher had passed, and they gave her the scene where she was also a Force adept, I was like, this is cool. This isn't how I would have acknowledged Carrie Fisher's contributions to this series, but it wasn't distasteful. It's just like, guys, a little too soon, maybe. Uh,
What
Moff Gideon, the character of Moff Gideon as a deep fake was a really cool insert. I felt like that
was he
was.
deepfaked?
You remember
Okay, what movie or show are you talking about right now?
in Star Wars which hold on.
So I know Moff. Are you talking about Moff Tarkin? Because Moff
Oh yeah,
Gideon
sorry,
isn't. Okay,
not
yes,
Gideon. I
yes,
meant to say Tarkin. Gideon is from
yes.
Mandalorian. Yes, Grand Moff Tarkin, the actor's name, who I'm going to find in a second. Um,
Google.
I know, I'm working on
Yeah,
it.
I don't know his name either. I'm just But yeah, I talked about that because he was in Rogue One, But I think that's a little different because he I think had passed,
Right.
many years prior, and but it's not obviously it's not uncommon too. Not Disney's not the only one. Is you look at the Fast and Furious, where they had Paul Walker who passed away. I think in the middle of filming or the end of filming the seventh movie, and
Hmm.
they either had his brother or the deepfake or something to finish up the movie, and they kind of had this tribute, and then they kind of like moved on from that. So it's not uncommon. And I did think about Carrie Fisher, and I did feel weird about it. I just got so caught up in having like an actual lightsaber duel between like Vader and Kenobi.
Right.
Like that's not
Oh,
70s. I
for
want that
sure.
remade, but
Okay.
your point.
Right. So again, so like, right. So like, uh, I think that if they gave it like a special edition treatment, if they gave it like a cool, here's the like, Disney's version of What If, but in Star Wars form, um, where they acknowledge that it's not like part of the original like source canon. They're not trying to like overwrite source canon, not trying to like touch up source canon. They're just kind of doing this cool spin-off thing on the side to be like, guys, it's cool. Just come check it out. Come along with the ride. I would gobble that shit up.
Absolutely, I would love that.
So yeah, I want to take an opportunity to bring that up because like there's not really like a clean way of segueing into this idea, this like note you have of like, man, wouldn't that be cool if? Because like I agree 100%, wink nod Disney.
I mean, yeah, like it's just. I mean, there's so many. They're I don't know. I think also with the trend of them kind of sticking to TV shows, or at least kind of staying with the TV show trend for now and not really movies, I don't think that's going to be likely. Or maybe they will. I mean, they could make it into a TV show. They could have basically 3 seasons where it's the original trilogy for each season.
Oh,
And they
that
are
would
able
be.
to expand upon and actually give it like the dedication.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want a copy paste remake. I would want it to be modernized, but I would also reckon I didn't want it's difficult because like there are like key things that I want them to change, but it's also my key things that I want them to change is different from yours, which is different from the next fan, which is different from, and so it's really difficult to really make everyone happy. So I understand that the hesitation production wise to do that. Needless
Mhm.
to say, it's still gonna make them a lot of freaking money.
I mean, right, like I would gobble that up. That's it. That's the pitch. There's my sales pitch,
Because
everybody.
I mean, because you get the vans, you get the fans that have been with us for a while, who've watched the original trilogy, who've been watching this, and of course there's generations older than us who've been doing it, who were with it from the beginning. There's us, and then there's the next generation who's into Star Wars because of the Clone Wars TV series, or they're because of 789, where they probably haven't really experienced it, or they don't really enjoy it as much because it's 40 years dated, 50 years dated.
Hmm.
And so modernizing that, you just kind of You bring in the people who the nostalgia fans. You bring in the new fans. So again, once again, proving that please I should be hired. Dave Filoni. Let's go. Uh,
Let's go.
all right.
Okay,
So
yeah, next point.
so
Next
let's
point.
get back
I also want
into
to
this
I
because
also
we've
want
kind
to
of
talk about this one.
deviated.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess from kind of going forward, the notes that I have were a little more movie centric and less like franchise centric. Well, they affect the franchise, but less so than bringing in too much. Because like I wholeheartedly think that George Lucas had a plan, and I mean had an expansive, of course, decades long plan, because obviously the prequels were about the Clone Wars, and in 30 years prior, 20, 23 years, 30 years prior, like how when he's writing Star Wars, how would he know about the Clone Wars? But Luke mentions it. Luke mentions when he actually meets Obi-Wan, not Ben Kenobi, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he mentions that, or I guess, or no, Obi-Wan says like he was a good friend of his of Luke's father's, and he's like, oh, you fought in the Clone Wars with my father, like in the 70s, like 79, like the concept of having a war of clones, I think, is like just clone by itself. I think is like this sci-fi like revelation back in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
time. Having
for
not lived
sure.
in that time, it's hard for me to say, but like looking back at trends of sci-fi and everything, like I think that alone is interesting. But then he just had this entire war that revolved around clones. I just think it's really freaking cool, and it's even backed up even more that when the imperial officers that we were talking about earlier, where they're talking about, oh, the imperial senate will never allow this to happen, like they're outraged by us imprisoning Princess Leia. Tarkin comes in and goes, the Emperor just dissolved the Senate, so now all remnants of the old Galactic Republic have been dissolved. There was a whole other government before you, and then they had some remnant of it that existed still currently in your empire, and then you dissolved it again. Like, again, it's just the plan that George Lucas had. I freaking love, and just again, no one can convince me otherwise that this was a one-off. This was calculated. This may have taken him longer than he probably intended to, but he had a franchise in mind, and that's, I think, the only reason why Star Wars really kind of succeeded the way it did. But like, it's definitely why he's successful and why he is, for better or for worse, a fantastic producer or executive producer and director.
I agree 100%. I say that a lot. I'm going to continue saying it because it's true. I
We're
think
too similar of people to have a
they,
podcast. It's just us going back and forth. Like, I agree. Good point.
we've
I agree.
disagreed. We've disagreed. All
You
right.
can't. Well, you can't thrash young Kenobi like that. Okay, you're in the wrong.
I may have thrashed him a little bit. Listen, okay, we can come back to Kenobi. All right, we can come back to Kenobi here in a minute. What I just want to, echo. I want to echo the sentiment. It was planned. George Lucas had a plan. George Lucas had a world that was developed in the same vein as like Blade Runner, in the same vein as how, um, or sorry, in the same vein as how Blade Runner and uh, Alien, both having been directed by Ridley Scott, are canonically in like some kind of obscure, detailed way connected universes. Uh, there is kind of like an overarching sense to me that um, George Lucas had been paying attention a lot to the world around him when he was like first conceiving of this idea of his space opera, you know. And I,
Do you have to
having
call
not
it that?
been, not well, hold on. I say that because the content that comes out in the books, in the canonic extended universe books, uh, makes it very much more operatic um, than I would say the movies are. And production reasons for why that might be the case aside, there's just those I keep coming back to this point, but I cannot stress it enough. The ambient storytelling, the world building, the atmospheric nature of how information is given to the audience, I think is highly underrated. And I think that George Lucas, from the get go, when he has all these little bits and pieces kind of throughout all of his movies, where he alludes to this extended universe with all this other content that exists. Some of it is just kind of exposition, so that we think that we're in a cool science fiction world, and we're starstruck by it. Um, but others is like you're saying, like this dude, ha- he was trying to show an extended universe of like an idea he had before the first movie even came out in the first 45 minutes of the movie. Like he had a plan. He had this whole thing, the Clone Wars, the Senate. When you start talking about the different planets and how they were different like players in the political system, like the power dynamic of the rebels versus the Imperial Army, like you start talking about a thing I may want to talk about in the future when Han Solo very famously mentions that he did the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs, I think, or is it just 12 parsecs? And
Uh,
parsec isn't a unit of time; it's a unit of
yeah.
distance. And how sciencey nerds people were like, "This is dumb and stupid." Well, in that same sentence, he also says that his Millennium Falcon outruns Carulian class battleships, and I that that's like a thing in Star Wars canon. That's not just like George Lucas coming up with a cool name or some writer coming up with a cool name. That's a thing that shows up in like other movies and other text. Like there's a whole thing behind it, man. Like he had a plan. I agree. I like him. I like his face. I like his movies.
Like his
He's a
face.
good guy.
Uh, well, it's also interesting because you bring up the Kessel Run. Um, I wish you would have stated a little in the movies because it sounds like he's a little backtracking his inability or not inability, but his mistake is that he in interviews has given that like, oh why does Han say he can make the Kessel Run or he's made the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs? Is that his reasoning says it says that Han Solo was supposed to kind of talk big, but not 100% know what he was talking about,
Mhm.
and that's kind of the reasoning. But also, it kind of doesn't work when Disney goes and makes the Solo story and they make it fact.
Yeah, they make it a canon thing.
So, like, I like the callback, but also it doesn't work with the original,
Sure.
the original, not idea, not dream, but I don't know. The original idea of what the
Right.
character and what the quote was supposed to be.
Right, like that specific line. I'm just using that as a reference point because in that same conversation, he mentions the Carillion class battleship. Oh my gosh,
I don't even know. Is
vehicles.
that supposed to be the triangle ones? All I know,
It's
listen. All I
yeah.
know is Tie Fighter means twin ion engine. I know nothing else about ships.
There's so much that we can talk about later.
Write your podcast talking points, and we'll talk about it.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm trying to move. We got life stuff going on.
I know.
Um,
I know.
but no, I'm with you, dude. I am excited.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, I had
So
to go on a little
yes, that
tangent.
was
Just want to
tangents aside.
get
Back
that
to
out
the
of my
movie.
system.
Uh yeah. So the next point that I kind of wrote because obviously I wrote these, and for the most part they are in like chronological order of the movie. Of obviously I just wrote down things that I noticed when watching it, and as we're going through now, we're getting to a point where we're exploring a little more about Obi-Wan, and he's talking about the Force, and he's talking to Luke, and everyone's calling it this old religion, Imperial officers, Han Solo, but clearly it's not, this hocus pocus that people believe. Vader force chokes someone. You see these subtle mind tricks and subtle force manipulation that Obi Wan does.
Hmm.
And when I'm thinking about Obi Wan, I'm thinking about how old Obi Wan is, and even though it isn't something that like is thought about, or at least I don't think it was thought about it at the time, but how it kind of fits into the franchise as a whole, is that Obi Wan Kenobi, old Obi Wan, is not a true Jedi. He's not a Jedi in the traditional sense. And that obviously makes sense because in this point, it's 20 years removed from his training, from the Galactic Republic, from any real contact with any other, force sensitive being, or at least that we know of. I guess technically, Rebels introduces um, Ezra and Maul into old Obi Wan's life for a brief moment,
Hmm.
but like saying that he's no longer a true Jedi because you look at two things that he does in this original trilogy. You look at how he scares away the Tusken Raiders when they're attacking Luke, and you look at how he became a Force ghost. Both of those are dark side powers. The Force screams. How he scares away the Tusken Raiders is kind of one of those things that people explain post, so I don't really care about, but it's of note or worthy of note. Is that it's like this Force scream where it's like this big bellow that even Palpatine uses or technically uses in Episode 3 when the four Jedi, including Mace Windu, try to arrest him, where it's supposed to like scare away or intimidate or kind of like almost freeze people in fear, uh, giving you the upper hand. And then in the Clone Wars show, towards the end, I think Yoda goes on this long trek where he kind of hears the voice of Qui Gon Jinn, and you learn that the Force Ghost is actually a. It's kind of a combination of like light side and dark side powers, but it's a primarily. But it was created by the Sith as a
Mm.
ways to like circumvent death. Of course, since they never really kind of incorporated the light side into it, they couldn't really master it. But like, so Qui Gon Jinn at some point in his extended universe canon, he studied the dark side or he fell to the dark side at some point, and that's how he was able to. He didn't complete his training, so that's why he came back as a voice in Episode 2, the movie when Anakin kills the Tusken Raiders. He yells Anakin no. So he's technically still around and still existing. So he's like half a Force ghost. And of course, in the Clone Wars show, he's more prominent as a voice. Teaches Yoda. Yoda teaches Obi Wan, or at least sends Obi Wan to where Qui Gon is to train how to do a Force ghost. Which all of this is canon to Episode 3. At the very end, Yoda offhandedly mentions it. Um, but yeah, so Obi Wan's not a Jedi anymore. He's not solely a light side user. In then going in past that and thinking more and analyzing it more, you look at the how he talks about the Force and how he talks about the properties of a Jedi and the principles of a Jedi to Luke, and they're not the same principles that were taught to the Jedi 20 years ago. I think at this point, with much time of either spending time with Qui Gon Jinn's ghost and meditating in discovering the Force on himself and not being practically brainwashed by the Jedi Council and the Jedi
Mm.
Order, he has become much more Qui Gon like. And he talks about, he doesn't just say the words living Force, but he talks about the philosophy of the living Force, where it's the Force, it's this thing that surrounds us and penetrates us, and he doesn't say like we can manipulate it. He's like we can see through the Force, we can feel through the Force, reach out through your feelings. He doesn't say manipulate it so you can move this thing. He doesn't say keep your emotions in check. You can't wed or have children. He just kind of is like, hey, the Force. It's not until Yoda that Yoda is like, use the Force to control things. Obi Wan never does that. Never teaches Luke that, and I think it's really interesting that his master, like his teachings of his master, are finally coming to fruition. All of this being like a not retcon, but a retroactive thing.
Right.
I just find it really interesting.
So I had never thought of that.
I know,
Like
like, why would
sincerely,
you?
right? Like, because he's Obi-Wan fucking Kenobi. Why why would you? Well, I'd never thought of this. Um, so I mean, I guess if the hot take here is that he is more of a force wielder than a strict Jedi, because like Jedi aren't like a breed of person. They're not like an alien species. They're an ethos,
It's
Um,
like it's a mental state. It's a way of living.
right. Like I mean, it's the same thing as calling
Lifestyle is the word I'm
yourself
looking for.
a monastic monk, right? Like it is a lifestyle. It's a type of scripture through which one practices and is and does things in life. Um, that, wow, gosh. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, no. You know, there's a part of me that's like, no, that isn't possible. It's like, no, actually, the whole thing, right? Like you even bring up Qui-Gon Jinn. Um,
But like, I mean, we've talked
oh,
about it. Well, sorry to cut in, but we've like
yeah,
talked about it in the past where we don't think that the Jedi Order, at least the Jedi Council's teachings in one, two, and three, were correct. Like they're incredibly vain. They think that they can control more than they can, and like they think they're all powerful. Whether or not they admit it or not, or even like believe it, they rely so heavily on the ability of foresight to predict and control the future that they don't really live in the present, and it just you look back and you're like, well, none of that has ever been talked about in the original trilogy.
I have, right. So not having thought about this idea, I feel like I am compelled to begin spiraling down into like processing out loud, like, well, I think about some stuff and I make observations, and
Go for
I
it.
know that can, well, I mean, I don't want to go on forever and ever. One thing as you were just talking comes to mind that I think is at least worth mentioning. Um, there is an idea, right? I think we've talked about how Obi-Wan Kenobi is the best boy. Um, I think Obi-Wan Kenobi, when we meet him in New Hope, is a Force master, and I think that he has been a Jedi master. I think that he has been around with it for a long time and has embraced a lifestyle that is less about trying to use the Force as like a motivating factor of the universe and more is just kind of part of like the cooperative, component of life. Um, you can call this a hot take, but Obi-Wan knew Anakin. Obi-Wan knows, knows that Darth Vader is Anakin and that Luke Skywalker is Darth Vader's son. Spoilers. So, what if this man, spending years, decades even, in isolation, rediscovers a relationship with the Force that isn't about what the Jedi was teaching him? Because, the Jedi aren't really around anymore. The Jedi Council is no longer really around anymore. They've gone to ground. Um, but you still have that connection. And what if you're out there in the middle of the desert and one day you think to yourself, golly, wouldn't it just be weird if that Luke Skywalker kid that I saved and hid from his evil father uh, decided to take after his father? What should I teach him? Wouldn't you think that somebody who had indulged in the desire of a powerful Force user to exercise power and have a relationship with the Force that was exclusively through power, wouldn't you look at that and think to yourself, with my second kid, I'm not gonna fuck him up.
My
Right? Like,
second kid. Yeah.
because you're right. You bring up Qui-Gon Jinn, and Qui-Gon Jinn's entire jam is to have a relationship with the Force because it's a component of all living things. It permeates us. It's a property of the universe the same way that heat and cold is. And it just happens to be that some people can have a more complex relationship with it where they can see and feel things and they can do stuff. And then there are people on the dark side of the Force, the possibly poorly named dark side of the Force, who are like, this relationship is something that I can manipulate. Isn't that weird? Interesting. It would behoove a wizened Obi-Wan to look at the son of the most powerful Force user, maybe debatably, in this time period of Star Wars canon, and say, hey, bud, let's look at how beautiful flowers are and not talk about how you can kill flowers with the Force. Is that cool? Do you want to do that? Let's do that, right? Because then the upbringing for Luke Skywalker becomes entirely about that relationship that Qui-Gon was trying to teach Obi-Wan about, that Obi-Wan maybe felt bad that he never figured out until after Qui-Gon Jinn passed.
So I mean,
Character development.
even
Whoa.
I think years after. So it's an interesting notion because I think kind of going forward with this train of thought is that you see it in episodes 1, 2, and 3 where I mean, even though Obi-Wan respects and listens to in his training under Qui-Gon, you can infer that he respects and wants to learn more from the Jedi Council because he says like once or twice that like Qui-Gon, if you just listen, you fought the rules more, you'd be a master on the Jedi Council, and Qui-Gon's like, I don't care about that. Like I'm just living through the Force. I'm doing what the Force thinks. And you even see in 2 and 3 where he doesn't fully grasp having the like living with the living like being mindful of the living Force. He rises to become a member of the Jedi Council, and like I think and he even sees what the effects of like what thing how things can go wrong because he believed so heavily into the Jedi Council and what they were doing and what their teachings were that he didn't want to think that they could be wrong. They could be driving his brother, his disciple, to the dark side. And I think all of that accumulates to him having, and I wish this occurs in the Kenobi series, that it's his epiphany that like everything I've known is wrong and everything I've believed is wrong, and like what are the other avenues that I can believe in and really learn and understand and why everything's happening. And it comes to him, he's like Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn possibly knew everything that was going to happen and still wanted it to happen anyway because that was the will of the Force. He wasn't worried about politics. He wasn't worried about, I mean, inner office politics, basically, which what the Jedi Council was, the Jedi Order. He
Right.
just did his thing. And I think that was like that could have been a huge, or can be a huge turning point in the character of Obi Wan Kenobi as he's transitioning from the young Obi Wan Kenobi that I wholeheartedly loved to the old one. So
That oh yeah,
I have huge
it would make
hopes.
amazing story content to explore that entire thing. Absolutely.
And like this is just us kind of putting together pieces that might not be there as people do with you know as other people have done, and we've talked about overrated, underrated characters. Maybe we're just like we're pushing words into George Lucas, into Dave Filoni's mouth of how this character should be or how they're progressing, and we'll hopefully see it in the show. It's just one of those things that like it makes sense, and it doesn't like go too far off the reservation to be like, oh, he fell back in love with the Mandalorian woman, and then they had a kid, but then he realized, and then he went back to exile. That's all like bullshit. And I really hope they don't have some weird, stupid like side-scrolling story that has nothing to do with Kenobi's transition into Qui Gon Jinn's philosophy, which is pretty much what again he is in the original trilogy. Whether or not George Lucas knew about Qui Gon Jinn and the Living Force at the time, and it's whatever. I don't know. Anyhow, that's that's I don't even know when that's coming out.
Well, I gosh, it's hard to not have those expectations set when you have so much invested, and you're like, I really want this to be good.
Yeah, that's true. But it's also because it's such a fan favorite and personally of mine. Of like how I like the character and I want to write the character. It's not that common for me where I'm like I want to take someone else's idea and add upon it. He's one of those rare examples that I do, and so unfortunately that's why I have such high expectations because I'm like, oh, I have this really cool idea and I think it's like well well written and could be like really explored and do well, and then when it doesn't happen, I get a little disappointed. So I'm hoping that's not what happens, but who knows. But back to what the whole this episode of the podcast is supposed to be about, which is episode
About New
4,
Hope.
the first movie, the first iteration of Star Wars ever. And I think it's about time can I just want to ask this, and I'm sorry in advance. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
This is rated for mature audiences, but can we
Yeah.
just talk about jizz
It's
and
not.
what the
It
fuck
doesn't.
George Lucas was thinking about
It doesn't
when
have to be named that.
it
It can
doesn't. It
be
doesn't.
anything.
Doesn't have to be named. Doesn't you could have just
For
jazz,
for
ska. You could just
for
a
those of
weird
you
combination of jazz and ska. Like
listening at home, for those of you listening at home, we are of course talking about the famous music from the Mos Eisley Cantina.
yeah, so it's the
uh,
traditional music that you think when you hear Star Wars. The da 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 da. It's
yeah.
such an iconic scene. It's such iconic music. You know, it's like kind of like referred to in I'm gonna assume every movie, but at least most movies. You know, or most versions of Star Wars. But it's just it's there. You hear it and you think about it, and nothing ever comes to mind outside of Star Wars. But and this is extended universe. This is extended universe stuff. But yes, the genre of music that is playing in the Mos Eisley Cantina, where Obi Wan Kenobi and Luke hire Han Solo and Chewbacca, is canonically called Jizz. And I think George Lucas is a smart enough man to know certain words and which words you can use and which words you can't use in a family friendly franchise.
So, to be clear, I'm pretty sure jizz wasn't a thing that was around at the time.
Don't make me
Uh,
Google this. Please.
sources that it it comes from the term jazz, uh, and that the earliest citations, the earliest times that these things have been documented as being words that were in common vernacular were in into the 1800s. But I think that the term jizz, uh, used in a more lewd context, a more explicit context, if you will, came after, no pun intended, uh, the first Star Wars movie, and that it's just an unfortunate accident. And I really hope that that's true. I have done no significant
Yeah,
Googling
I'm
or research on the point. I,
so
it's there, and if anybody out there
okay.
in the world wants to check us, you can Google
So in
Star
incognito
Wars
googling
music.
right now, incognito
Go.
googling as you're talking about this. So technically, it did come in the mid 1800s. Damn it, words. Words suck. And so it was originated in the mid 1800s, meaning like energy or strength, which kind of makes sense, you know, especially with along the lines of like what George Lucas had in mind, because it's a very high energy music genre and a music style, so that makes sense. And according to Reddit, if we want to listen to Reddit, even as early as 1888, so it only lived for about 46 years before it became slang for things that you shouldn't be saying in a Star Wars film. And so, according to Reddit, there's not much. There's really not much room for George Lucas to talk or to backtrack off that one. It's just he's either really ignorant or he just didn't care.
I am holding out. I'm gonna hold out. I'm gonna assume that every time you see a picture of the paparazzi being complete monsters to George Lucas and he just looks absolutely tired because it's the paparazzi and they're all a bunch of energy vampires, that it's because he's remembering the mistake he made by not being able to see the future. Calling this music jizz. Uh, so, just to air that one out, talk about the elephant in the room. That's canon.
All
That's
right,
canonically what it's
so
called.
yes,
The more
so
the more you know.
we got 5 episodes in before we talked about it, and we'll never talk about it again.
Nope,
Hopefully.
Just
Okay.
we're just gonna leave it there.
It's the dirty laundry has been aired. It's good. It's there. Just no more. You know what's also really cool about Mos Eisley Cantina?
What's that?
We first meet Han Solo and Chewbacca, and
Oh, what a segue!
hey, we're professionals. So something that I looked into a little bit, and I just never also something that like it's just a discussion or a topic of discussion for Star Wars fans that I never really understood was the Han shot first. So of course, what we're referring that in the original edit of Star Wars, Han Solo is greeted by Greedo, the bounty hunter working for Jabba the Hutt, and he owes Jabba the Hutt money, and so Greedo's there to kind of extract it out of him, bring him to Jabba, or kill him. It's one of the three. And Han Solo is trying to, talk his way out of it, like, oh, I'll pay him soon, I got a job. And Greedo's like, that's not good enough. You've used your extensions. Like, it's time to pay. And so Han Solo, while he's talking, whatever, he kind of he's like slowly and subtly grabbing his gun, and he unholsters it and he shoots Greedo. And Greedo doesn't, in mid conversation.
Mhm.
In the I think it's the 1997 edit, when Star Wars became A New Hope, Episode 4, it was edited that Greedo attempted to fire first, missed, and Han Solo shot him in self defense. I looked this up, and I don't remember. I think George Lucas liked the edit because it softened Han Solo. He wasn't this ruthless killer. Excuse me. He wasn't this ruthless killer. He was like
Right.
this scoundrel with a heart of gold. And of course, like he's a gunslinger, and so shooting in self defense is not going to be something super harsh, especially when this entire movie is about stormtroopers and you're shooting like faceless stormtroopers because they're just people in a white helmet. But a lot of people have issue with this. So I mean, I wondered where you stood on this. Did Han shoot first? Did
I
did it help his character? Does it fucking matter?
okay. Um, I think that I understand the premise. So everything you just mentioned, I recall quite clearly is being correct. It was an edit that was made. George Lucas was very, excuse me, was very adamant about trying to illustrate that Han Solo wasn't just some thug. He was a little bit more of a likable guy, a little with a heart of gold, scoundrel with a heart of gold, as it were. And so I think as much as there's a stigma around the term retcon, I think a canonic retcon in that version of the movie and George Lucas's sanctioning and desiring to have that retcon makes it official. I think that Han did not shoot first, and I realize that that sets a a bad precedent because that means that anybody could, in theory, edit history to something more favorable. You're right. Like in the very beginning, Han Solo shot first, and that's just how the movie works. I remember having the VHS tapes in my house and watching them as a child. He shot first.
Little
There's
baby Ian.
you can't argue. Little baby Ian watching the ruthless murderer Han Solo. But like, I think that you ask a good follow-up question in Does It Matter? And I actually don't think that it does because I think that even though the premise of wanting to reinforce that Han Solo is just kind of a lovable, scruffy-headed nerf herder, uh, he's he has three or had three original other movies to demonstrate that he wasn't a worthless, not worthless, sorry, a ruthless monster.
Mm-hmm.
Even throughout the rest of that movie, he is characterized as um, being just as scrappy and resilient as any of the other people from within the rebellion. Like the movie literally opens with rebel soldiers fighting stormtroopers and people being shot and dying. Having saying that like that one scene is going to correct or significantly change one's impression of Han Solo, I think is a bit of an overstatement because of how if you continue to watch the movies after, X amount of time, he He really isn't. He like no matter what, he does have a heart of gold. Even if he were ruthless like that, he comes back, right? Even if he were
Yeah.
ruthless like that, he cares about his friends. He may care about surviving and getting money, and he may be totally willing to ditch people at first, but he has a conscience and he comes back and says, "No, you know what? It isn't about just money. This is something bigger than me." And he continues to grow. He continues to grow throughout the movies in the same way. Minus the times when he's um, later imprisoned in carbonite, because you can't really have much growth when you're imprisoned by carbonite. But you know what I mean? Like he's a different person by the time that the trilogy, the original trilogy ends. I trying to watch the movie, as impossible as it is, without or sorry, by like taking it as though I'd never seen it before. Um, that scene to me just looked like a really weirdly edited piece of film. Uh, like, had I never seen any of the Star Wars movies, had I seen that scene, I would have been like, well, that's really weird. They did that because they wanted to correct him being shot at. That's weird. Why would they need to do that? Without the cut, like had they not done that at all, I wouldn't have been like, oh wow, he's a crazy monster man. I would have been like, oh dang, Star Wars is kind of intense. These guys aren't messing around. And then the movies would have progressed, and then Han Solo would have continued to communicate to me, the audience, who he was, and I don't think it really would have mattered in the end. I think that Han in movie production canon, in the production canon, the term that I've coined a couple of times now, shot first. I think that in story canon, it's totally fine for the retcon to stand because it doesn't change him. It doesn't change who he
So
is.
if you had asked me like 3 minutes ago what I thought about Han, if Han shot first, I would have told you it didn't matter.
Hmm.
You believe whatever you want. It just have fun, okay? Just as long as you enjoy it,
Right,
believe whatever you want.
right.
But as you're talking and I'm listening to you and I'm kind of thinking about it, and I'm actually kind of sitting down. And I'm actually kind of whoop, just dropped my pen. I'm sorry. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking and actually contemplating everything about it. And I've actually come up with an answer that I'm kind of surprised. So I actually fallen on the side that I think, or I prefer that Han shoots first. And
Yeah.
it's only evidenced by, because you're talking about his journey as a person, as he's growing through the original trilogy, that he is someone who kind of literally shoots first, asks questions later, and it's evidenced in episode 5. And it's one of the reasons why I respect him as a character. When someone explained this to me, when he's betrayed by Lando Calrissian and the door opens and Darth Vader's sitting there, he takes his gun out and he shoots. He doesn't say a word, and I think that is his person. That is more true to his person than shooting in self defense. Is that he's someone who doesn't think about the consequences. He's not the smartest person, as we've seen, and with the explanation of him saying the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, not knowing that's a unit of distance instead of time. I think it actually plays and leans into his character a little more than people think, because he is someone who shoots first,
I mean,
and
that is a good
yeah.
point. It's not out of character.
And so yeah, as I was thinking about it, I that's where I've landed. I don't think it's canon. Like I don't. I think I'm still of the opinion. Believe what you want to believe. Okay, if it makes you happy that they soften his character by having him shoot in self defense, enjoy it all you want. If you think that he shot first because that's the true canon of the editing of the original story, then again, have at it. Have fun. I don't think in the long run it doesn't matter that much. It's like versus other things we've talked about canon wise, like it's Ahsoka canon that has a lot more implication than this one almost half-second scene of just one or two blasters being fired. And that's it. So you know. So anyhow, but so we're talking about it about Harrison Ford and we're talking about Han Solo. So I'm actually gonna skip a few points
Hmm.
here that I have, just because I
Yeah,
want I
go
want
on.
to I want to talk about Han a little more, and
Yeah.
just how much like Harrison Ford is just a national treasure, because that was a that was our introduction to the character. Was him, well, not like the initial, but like 2 minutes after our initial introduction to him was him shooting Greedo. But then later on, as we discover more of his character, even just in that one movie, not even the original trilogy, is that he like likes to talk big. He's suave, but he's not good at it, and it's just really fun to watch. And when you have quotes like I'm jumping ahead to when they're on the Death Star with Luke. I guess everyone's on the Death Star, and they're trying to save Leia, and they pretended to be stormtroopers. They shot up the I don't know sector of stormtroopers and Imperial officer that are there, that are kind of maintaining that detention block. And then he gets on the intercom to help, like try to quell down anybody who might have heard or wants to is going to send troops. And he tries like, oh, everything's fine, weapon malfunction. How are you? What do you mean you asked that question? Like, just that at the end, how are you? I think that's really funny, and I think that's really, indicative of what his character is. And then later on, like at the end of the conversation, when it kind of devolves, where he's like, "We're gonna send people anyway," and he shoots it, and he like doesn't know what to say or do, so he just shoots it again. Going back to he just shoots things. He doesn't care about the consequence. He shoots
Right.
it, and he goes, "Boring conversation anyway." Luke, we gotta go. Like those subtle small lines that are just kind of thrown in or like sprinkled in really make this character like just really really fun. And like
I
in
yeah, yeah.
jumping ahead to episode 5, and this was ad libbed and later like made canon, was Leia going, "I love you," and he goes, "I know." Okay, like come on, you can't enjoy this character, at least his like his banter, uh, you know, without that.
I I mean, I know we have praised Harrison Ford in the past. We're gonna do it again. He's he's just he really is a treasure. What a guy. This guy, this Harrison Ford guy. This scene. So it's funny you wanted to bring this one up too. It's a very quintessential scene, you know. It's a very quintessential meme. It's been a thing for a long time. The humor, right? The humor of this scene pervades popular culture and has for decades. Uh, I absolutely love, as an adult, how awkward that scene is and how, like, how hard Harrison Ford is trying to, like, be uncomfortable and clearly be panicking and not know how to do what he's doing. Because, like, again, all bluster. He's all been confidence and snarks and sneers.
In
And
the
then
the dumb
he
lies,
yeah,
like, oh no, no,
and he
don't
gets
come here, there's a reactor leak, a huge reactor leak.
right. It's like, oh, weapon malfunction. It's fine. Oh, wait, no, it's actually a super. Like, I know that he, as an actor, is being given direction, and that like the directors are just kind of doing their thing. I just think that it was such a funny moment to like because pervading again, having never watched, preventing that I've never watched this movie, um, pervading the entire. Did I say preventing, pretending, whatever it is that I said, pretending that I had never watched this movie, pervading the entire movie. My experience was that it was a little improvised at times. There were some times when like it didn't have the same kind of like Disney 20th Century Fox polish that we get nowadays. You know, uh, so like there's nuance. There's like nuance in the subtle gestures where not everything has to be a perfectly placed camera angle with a ton of post editing. You get Harrison Ford up at his little control terminal. Like he's looking at this display, this interface that doesn't make any sense. Like even to us, the audience, like I'm looking at this control console and I'm like, I don't how do you even work with this thing? I don't know what this is. It's like a bunch of cardboard tubes and some chrome paint and whatever. And so he walks right up to it and he's like immediately confounded and it's like, I don't uh and then just picks a point on the board and presses a button and is like, everything's fine. No, it's great. And oh god, I can't sing enough the praises of how like how much that scene tickles me.
It's a very good scene. It is a very very good scene. And I mean, I'm willing to say it's probably where when people kind of fell in love with Han Solo, because at this point, like he had kind of been snarky. He's a little combative with the main characters, and really just like wanting money. He's works for a thug, like a gang lead, like a gang lord. So like you haven't seen really too much of his actual personality. You've only seen like the persona he shows,
Right.
and this really just kind of gives you a peek behind the curtain. And it's a blast. It's so fun. Like that's a scene that holds up. You know.
So so what if I mean we've been talking for a minute. I kind of want to get an early read. I think we have one more point here to look at the list, and if you want to talk about this one
So
too, we totally can. Um, it am I
I just can't.
correct in my understanding uh that you kind of like this movie? Is this how it sounds? Because it sounds like you kind of like this movie. Is all I'm trying to say.
I mean, I enjoy the franchise. I enjoy the role and significance that Episode 4 has in the movies, in the franchise, and in the canon. As a standalone, I enjoy parts of it, but I probably would not have been. If I was in 1977, I would not have been the most excited for Episode 5. Because I think it's unfortunately a product of the 70s where it was just kind of thrown together and it didn't have really much of a budget, and I was like I enjoyed it at times, but I would not have been as into it as I am now.
Hmm. So,
But yes.
I mean, we still have one more point. I just wanted to leave a little bit of air room for us to be able to touch on that last point. A thing that you may have brought up. I'm gonna steal this segue. A thing that you brought up a little bit. I think about his snark, his jokiness, Han Solo's way with women, uh, is an exchange that I think was also really funny, uh, in a kind of more subtle way, maybe not like a more modern humor style where it's not about sarcasm. It's more about Han Solo kind of being a petulant older sibling to Luke. Right when their relationship starts to kind of like flush out, and you start to get the sense that they're becoming more friendly with one another as they are, as so I should say, spoilers, after Han Solo, Luke,
Wait, why?
and
What's you and the
Chewie I
spoilers?
escape the Death Star. Uh, gotta say it. I don't know who hasn't listened. After you guys or watch the movie, I don't know who's listening. But after they escape the Death Star, and Luke and Han are kind of hanging out, and Luke's like, "So Han, what do you think of Leia?" And Han, he's just being himself. He's just being conceited. He's whatever. Blows Luke off, and Luke is like, okay, whatever. And there's a moment where like Han kind of perks up and is like, wait, you got a thing for her, don't you? And you can see it in his face where Harrison Ford's like, oh, I'm gonna fuck with you,
It's that
and he's
that
like, oh,
smile that creeps out.
right, that like, oh, I don't know. Now that I think about it, she is kind of, oh,
Yeah,
what
like
do
I
you,
think
you ever think? What do you ever think that Leia would go for a
yeah,
guy
a
like
princess would
me?
go for yeah.
Oh my God! And like dead ass. Not only again one of these like these kind of subtle, nuanced interactions that happens in the story. Not only is it just Luke saying like, "Oh what? No, I totally want a Leia," because he's a teenage boy and hasn't seen human beings. I guess
He
he
lives with his aunt and uncle
he,
on like
he
on
literally
a
just says,
sand planet.
but like his response is literally just dead ass no. There's no punchline. There's no lead up. There's no banter. It's just Han
That
Solo.
wasn't even Mark Hamill didn't even know the cameras were rolling. He thought they were talking about Carrie Fisher.
Right. So he's like, no. He just shits on him, man. And the look that fucking Harrison Ford gets that on his face, where he's like, whoa, got me. Dang, this kid's in it. Like, oh,
Like that's actually a scene I didn't know existed. I know what you're talking about. And I love this scene,
yeah.
but it's actually one I didn't know existed when like I guess as of like last year or and before, because
Really?
back when we were working together in May, May the 4th. And so I was like, oh, I've got Disney Plus. I'll just go through and I'll watch all 9 movies, and I'll put it on the background, or not watch. I'll put it on the background while I'm working. And this scene came up, and I'm like, is this a scene? Like this was this. And I was kind of like taken aback because I didn't remember the scene at all, like not even hints of it. Like I didn't even know that scene existed, and so I was like very surprised by it.
Mhm.
Still enjoy it very much though. And this is the transition to the point that you're referencing. It was a nice transition, by the way. Where, of course, at this point we don't know, and I'm gonna steal Ian's phrase. Spoilers. We don't know that Luke and Leia are siblings. Heck, I don't even know if we're fully told that in episode 5. I think they reference that Luke has a sibling, but they do not reference that it is Leia until episode 6. Uh, or at the end of episode 5, we learn that Leia possibly is force sensitive, and that kind of like hints at it, but doesn't explicitly say it in episode 6, obviously. And I don't know if George Lucas had that in mind necessarily when he was writing episode 4. I don't know if that was part of his plan or not. But the way that Luke is written in reference to Leia, by itself, there's no harm, no foul. But in the greater context of things, is really weird. Okay? I'm sorry. Luke is a little attention whory for Leia. When he first sees her on a hologram, he's like, "Oh, who's that pretty girl?" And he's like, "No, no, where'd she go? Bring her back." And he tries to flirt with her. When she's like, "Oh, you're a little short for a stormtrooper," he goes, "Oh no, this." He's like, "No, we're here to rescue him with Ben Kenobi." And then right before the scene we were talking about, where Luke and Han are talking about Leia, kind of in a romantic sense, and Han's fucking with him. It Luke wasn't in the scene; it was Leia and Han, and they were bickering like they always do, and she storms out, and as Luke's coming in, and she goes, "Oh, your friend doesn't care about anything or anybody," and Luke just very very desperately tries to go, "I care,"
Hmm.
and he just like dejectively just kind of goes and sits next to Han, and that's where this conversation occurs.
Right, I remember that
And
too.
it
Oh my
wasn't like
God.
this is not a very subtle scene.
No.
Or not scene, sorry, scene obviously, but it's not a very subtle theme that's occurring. Is that Luke has a thing for Leia? It's
Hmm.
something that's kind of apparent. And again, looking at the movie by itself, of course, you're gonna think of the romance, and you're gonna think it's the main character and the main girl. It's something that's happened. It's always gonna happen. It's happened before. It's happening now. It's happening in the future. But it's just like it just feels like it could have been part of George's plan, and so it's just really weird that he he has this in this movie. It's of course really funny to watch because like Mark Hamill trying his best. It's really funny because he's just like doesn't stand a freaking chance.
Hmm.
But just in the greater context of things, I just does not sit right.
It's right. Like once you know, you can't unknow. Um, it is really funny. It is really funny to see uh, how they tried to depict, Luke being a young man, learning about having feelings for a lady. And this might have been a little bit due to production choices, because as you mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, uh, the commercial had nothing really to do with the plot of the movie, because of its like kind of forced romance narrative. There may have been some amount of production canon involved here, right? Is all I'm trying to get at. But at the end of the day, I really can't disagree. There's a lot of like old people trying to write what young people are like in those interactions. He is a little needy, like I think that might just be me. I'm sure somebody else somewhere else might disagree, but the frequency that it happens, it's like supposed to be the cute, like I'm the young whatever who's fallen for the pretty princess archetype.
Yeah.
I don't really see
And
why they would have done that, knowing that George Lucas had a plan at the end. You know?
well, I don't. I mean, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm also thinking. I'm yeah thinking about it a little more, and I'm going back to the hero's journey, which we talked about earlier. That the hero's journey is like Star Wars is a fantasy. You know, no one can ever convince me that it's a sci-fi because it's a fantasy. You know, they're talking about Jedi Knights. You're talking about Princess Leia. You're talking about the big bad like Emperor in this space magic. Force is space magic. Okay, like this it's nothing. There's nothing sci-fi about. There's nothing like genre sci-fi about Star Wars. It has sci-fi, aspects to it. And you think about it, and you're breaking it down. Like, what's the difference between Star Wars and like a generic like Camelot, Knights of Camelot story where he's like, oh, he's like this squire who's taken on by this old knight, and he's taught the ways of how to be a knight, and he rescues the princess from the big bad castle, and then the princess falls in love because she was rescued by this handsome knight. Like that's the trailer, but that's also like what happened. And the only thing different is they just made it. Technically, it's in the past, but they made it like a couple thousand years in the future. And I think that's. I think. I don't think George Lucas had it in his mind, in his plan. It sounds like he did, but I don't think he had it in his plan. I don't think that the Luke Leia relationship was very popular, and people actually enjoyed having Han and Leia be a thing because they start Episode 5 right from the gate with Han trying to goad Leia into saying that she cares for him, that she wants him to stay and not run off. I forget the exact situation, but
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
watch that movie soon. I think that he originally kind of planned to have it like that, but also wanted to make Leia like kind of strong and independent, where she wasn't just instantly head over heels for the first guy she sees. That of course, unfortunately, that character, that strong character, kind of falls to the wayside the more you get into the original trilogy, or the later you get into the original trilogy. But I think that was his plan. Was that like Luke was going to try because that's kind of a little bit of the trope, but she was going to be that strong independent woman who didn't need a man to do things because she's facing down Darth Vader and telling him off. She's facing down Grand Moff Tarkin and telling him off, even when they blow up her home planet and everyone she's ever known and loved. And there's this, I guess, flying robot that's like this interrogation, this torture, and she still doesn't give in.
Mhm.
And I think that's probably a little more in line, but it still just seems a little eh. Even with all that considered, it seems a little eh. Like just by the sole fact that they're siblings, they're twins.
Right.
Because that also
Right.
speaks a little bit to Luke, where it's a little Games of Thronesy, where Jamie Lannister he can have any woman he wants, so he picks his twin sister who looks like him, supposedly. It's just okay, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay, Luke.
Oh.
Okay,
Yeah, dude. Again, I'm still with you on that one. It's a little when you know you can't unknow. So I look forward to talking about that more when we get to that movie.
that's the next movie. Yeah. All
Oh
right.
gosh,
Yes,
we did it.
that was
So okay,
quite a
final verdict.
note. That
Final
was
verdict.
quite a note.
What do you
Final
think?
verdict. I don't know. I mean, I said it a little bit earlier, because the question was prompted. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I enjoy it, and I enjoy its significance and its importance in the franchise. I think it's very important and like integral to the story because Star Wars is technically about Anakin, but you know, but it's kind of like leading up to Anakin's death. So even though it's like 4, 5, and 6 are technically about Anakin, as I will argue, Luke is important for Anakin's legacy, for the Jedi's legacy after. And so we haven't seen like as much of that as we have pre. Like we're getting more of it with we got 7, 8, 9, we got the Mandalorian show. We're getting more shows that are taking place after Episode 6.
Hmm.
Uh, seeing Luke grow and become, this the apps like the strongest Force user to basically ever exist, really, at least to my knowledge. Uh, the beginnings, the really low budget, cutesy kind of out there beginnings is something that is enjoyable. But if you're not really into this, if this is the first movie you're watching in 2021, it doesn't hold up as much as you think.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, like, I'm. I think we both said similar things at this point. I definitely still like the movie, um, and I appreciate it the most for its atmospheric storytelling style and for those little snippets we talked about earlier in our conversation tonight, today, this day, this episode, about the like extended world, about George Lucas having a plan. Um, would I give it a 10 out of 10? Probably not a 10 out of 10. Not by modern standards. Had I watched it back then, I probably would have rated it really highly because, had I been around in that time and, I hadn't seen the rest of the sci-fi context that was that, I, oh, oh my gosh, it would have
You
been
know,
amazing.
yeah. Well, thinking about it right now, what really made that movie was Han Solo and Darth Vader. Like, sorry for everyone else in that movie, and if these are your fan favorites or if you really like these characters, I'm sorry to say, but like they're fun side characters, but they don't carry the movie like those two characters do. They're the reason that you want to come back and want to see more. You don't know anything about Darth Vader, and he just suddenly, with his mind, choking someone across a room. Like, what's his story? Han Solo, like he's lovable, he's funny, he's just amazing every time he's on screen. Like you want to see more of him. Those two characters carry the movie, and I think that really just kind of I don't know. I don't know if it says a lot about the other characters or if it says a lot about them, but I don't know. I don't know. But
And
needless to
that's,
say, I am glad this movie became
yeah,
popular and that they made
100%.
that they made more because otherwise we would not have a podcast. We would not be talking on hours on end about this subject. But yeah,
Yeah.
all right. So with that, we have watched and reviewed and gave you our thoughts on the original Star Wars movie, Episode 4, New Hope. Next, I don't know if it's the next podcast or at least next movie we're going to be doing, obviously, is going to be Episode 5. Then I think a plan is to do 6, circle back to 1, 2, and 3, and then finish up with 7, 8, 9. So, yeah, we will see you then. Uh,
Hmm.
as always, I'm your host, Day. This is Ian. Good night, and may the Force be with you, always.
Good night.